Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Reason and common sense, are they acceptable now? Are they politically correct? Anyway, to set me straight on it, Leith Van Onselen. Morning, Leith. How are you?
Yeah, g'day, Mike. How's things?
Not too bad. You say Australia needs skills, not Uber drivers. Do the people who are in charge, the ones that got their hands on the levers at the moment, do they understand that, do you think?
I don't think so, mate. Unfortunately, this productivity summit that's been held this week in Canberra is an absolute joke, mate. And it's not going to come up with any concrete outcomes because it hasn't bothered to discuss the two key areas that are contributing most to the decline in Australia's productivity and living standards. And one of those is that Australia is running an excessively high, poorly targeted and low-skilled migration system. And so, effectively, Australia is said to have a skilled migration system. But when you actually look at the inflows of migrants, a very tiny proportion of that are so-called skilled migrants. Most are actually, international students, working holiday, maker visas, all these other things which are low-skilled. And even of the skilled migrants that we receive, a huge chunk of them don't actually work in the areas that they're purportedly skilled for. So, a classic example is engineering. So 60% of the engineers in Australia are foreign-born, yet half of the foreign-born engineers don't actually work as engineers.
They working at the 7-Eleven or something, are they?
Yeah, Ubers, that sort of thing. So Engineers Australia put out a report about a year or so ago where they complained that half of migrant engineers aren't working as engineers and they're driving Ubers and doing other, low-skilled stuff. So that is just, indicative of how poorly targeted our migration system is. It's actually very low-skilled. And it's not just engineering, it's other areas as well. Like just over half, so 51%, this is according to the migration review from the federal government, just over half of international student graduates. So those who came in on a student visa, graduated, and are on a graduate visa, so this is post-study work visa, 3 years after they finished their bachelor degree, 51% of them were working in unskilled jobs, according to the federal government's own migration, review. So all that tells you is that we're not actually solving any skill shortages here. We're just importing a whole bunch of lower skilled people to basically, juice GDP and whatever. And that's obviously putting a lot of pressure on housing infrastructure. But here's the other thing, Mike. One of the main reasons why we've got such poor productivity is because our business investment, our infrastructure, and of course our housing hasn't kept up with the massive increase in people. Australia's population has grown by 8.7 million people this century. And we haven't had the private capital investment, the infrastructure or the houses that go along with it. And as a result, our standard of living has gone down, not up, and our productivity has declined because the amount of capital investment per person has shrunk. And it's none of this is rocket science, but unfortunately, this is one of the areas where they haven't bothered to discuss. And then, of course, you've got the whole energy problem where we've got soaring energy costs due to idiotic net zero policies and the failure to reserve gas for domestic use on the East Coast. So, that's basically, despite the fact that Australia is rich in all kinds of energy other than oil, we export 7 times more coal to the rest of the world than we use ourselves. We export 4 times more gas than we use. We've got 30% of the world's uranium. We should have ridiculously cheap gas and electricity prices, but we deny ourselves the use of that stuff while we sell it to everyone else, like China, etc. And as a result, we are burdened with uber expensive energy costs, and then our manufacturers shut down, they go offshore, and we just add costs right throughout the supply chain, in every facet of the supply chain, and then that makes you less productive. So these are two areas where the Productivity Commission just won't even discuss. They released 5 papers. The Productivity Commission released 5 papers leading up to this summit, and not one of them mentioned the word immigration, and none of them really mentioned rising energy costs. They just talked about getting to net zero quicker, which is just the opposite of what you want if you want to actually boost productivity and living standards.
Well, just to unpack that a bit, one of the words at the moment, go back to immigration. I find it impossible to believe that even the most loyal, true believer thinks this government is serious when they say or said they were going to cut down the immigration numbers. I mean, look at the numbers so far, even for this year, and it's just way up on, what was promised or mooted. As far as the skilled thing is concerned, you and I have spoken about this in the past. They're just deliberately ignoring this at the productivity roundtable, as near as I can tell. And, we're not getting the people that we want that are going to improve productivity. It seems all they care about is the numbers. And as for the conditions that they're creating, there are just some awful, awful outcomes. Ben Fordham had a story the other day, and I was listening to it on the way home from the lady herself, who'd gone to emergency at 2:00 the previous afternoon. Here she is at whatever it was, around about 7:00 in the morning, and wanting to go home, but no, the doctors said what she had needed to be seen. And she's trying to sit on the chair or whatever. Other people are lying on the floor. This is such an appalling picture, Leith, but we're allowing it to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, Australia's had crush loading in everything, right? So as I said before, we've grown the population by 8.7 million people this century. That's a 46% increase. If you go by the Australian Bureau of Statistics population clock and you look at where we're at now, which is like 27.7 million roughly versus where we were at the turn of the century, that is the fastest growth in the advanced world. And of course, we haven't built all the infrastructure, so not just physical infrastructure, but all the social infrastructure, your hospitals, your schools, and everything else to match it. And as a result, we've got crush loading in hospitals, we've got crush loading in schools, we've got crush loading living standards left, right, and centre. And the federal government's approach seems to be everything. All their solutions seem to be revolving around importing more people.
Yes.
When you step back, you go, hang on, Australia's had appalling productivity growth since 2018. It's been basically the worst in the advanced world. Maybe we should try something different rather than just going back to doing what's failed for the last 20 years and just continuing. It's like, it's the definition of insanity here.
As Einstein reportedly said.
That's right. To keep doing the same thing over and over again, in this case, mass immigration and very poorly targeted high volumes of, let's face it, low skilled. And then also, hamstring yourself by giving yourself incredibly expensive gas and electricity prices, which then deindustrializes you as a nation because none of your manufacturing can compete. We've got the smallest manufacturing share in the OECD. It's only about 5% of the economy. And they're closing down and moving offshore. And we're just going to end up with a less diversified, less self-sufficient, deindustrialized economy, which is growing quickly, not in economic growth terms, but in people terms, because of high immigration. That's just crush loading our standard of living. I mean, do we really want to live in a Melbourne that's, supposed to be, 9 million people by 2050, or a Sydney that is supposed to be over 8 million by, the 2050s, or Brisbane that's supposed to be, 4.5 million by the 2050s, roughly, or almost the size of where Melbourne was, a decade ago. I mean, this is a recipe for declining living standards here. If we just keep growing our major cities, aggressively through immigration, but not providing the infrastructure, the services, the capital investment to go along with it.
But either we don't take enough interest, or the government is doing such a good job, maybe through the education system, of snowing young folks. There's somebody I know who's 22 who, on the one hand, gets very angry at the thought of not being able to earn enough money to buy a house. On the other hand, if immigration is mentioned, says, Australia was built on immigration, which is a meaningless cliche in the circumstances, because it's nothing personal, immigrants. It's just the numbers. Too many people for what we've got when it comes to resources and accommodation.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, young people tend to like to shoot themselves in the foot, and I think it's because they've got the woke mind virus, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to question this stuff because that'd be, xenophobic or racist, even though we're talking about a number.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if you're a first home buyer or a renter, there's nothing worse than running a high immigration policy. So, obviously, if you're a renter, it just puts upward demand on rents, because migrants, when they come here, they don't buy straight away. They tend to rent, so you're putting pressure on the rental market. And I should say that the surge in immigration since the pandemic is the primary reason why the median asking rent across the nation has soared by more than $10,000 since the pandemic, Mike. So just think about that. If you're the typical renter, the median renter in Australia, you're paying just over $10,000 more to rent a home than you were 5 years ago. Now that is directly out of your disposable income. So that's obviously a bad situation.
But of course, it's not a situation that is unhappy for everybody. I'm not going to name names, but I hear lots of stories about people who are mega rich, and they're very happy to have more people. They don't care about anything beside that, and supposedly they're big donors to political parties, that kind of thing. I mean, I'd want to have more detail before I went too far with it, but I do hear lots of stories along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, running a higher immigration program is fantastic if you're a capitalist. So this is why I call them the growth lobby. The growth lobby loves high immigration. They're your big business, your big property, your university sector, which obviously gets to clip the ticket on more international students. The vice chancellors pay themselves over $1 million. All the senior executives make pay dirt. And obviously the biggest growth lobbies of them all is the Australian Treasury. The Australian Treasury sees immigration as a way to repair the federal budget because the Commonwealth Treasury collects 80% of the nation's tax revenue. The federal government collects 80% of the nation's tax revenue. And if you import more people, you get more tax revenue through personal income taxes, etc. But the cost of that is borne by the states, by us private individuals, through, not just lower standard of living, but, the state governments have to then try and provide the services and infrastructure, which they never, succeed in doing. But they end up selling everything off. And then, if you're a Sydney-sider, 25 years ago, there was only, I think 2 toll roads in Sydney about 25 years ago. You got the Sydney Harbour Bridge and Tunnel, I count them as one, and then the one near the airport. Now you've got like a dozen toll roads, and you can't drive around Sydney without getting fleeced by Transurban. And that is a direct result of high immigration because Sydney's population has grown by about 1.5 million people. So for this century, it's landlocked. So the state government's going, oh, you know what? We need a whole bunch of toll roads, tunnels, etc. And they're all privately owned now. So you're basically spending more time to get around Sydney than you were 25 years ago, but you're paying through the neck. And this is your standard of living getting eaten alive, and it's going to be with water bills soon, right? Because they've announced that they're going to jack up your water bills to pay for new housing estates to accommodate migrants.
Yes, and these are the issues that are, I would say, being deliberately avoided at the big round table. Leith, always interesting. Thanks for that.
Yeah, cheers, Mike, anytime.
That's Leith Van Onselen.